Two. All right, how's everybody doing? And I'm so excited to be interviewing this gentleman, this young guy. This is my mentor, a person who has helped me tremendously. And he has so much to give and so much to share. And I'm so happy to provide a platform for that to happen. So I'd like to welcome Miss Professor Juan Battle. And Juan Battle is a distinguished professor in the CUNY Graduate Center. He's been working there for approximately 26 years, I believe, 27, something like that. And I really wanted to get a chance to talk about, or for him to share about his narrative, and also him as an expert in his field to share some solutions that we could be thinking about as educators in the Department of Education. So first of all, to start the conversation, I wanted you to share a brief history of your origin story, where you're from, your parents, your siblings, all of that good stuff.
Okay, well, just for a quick correction, I'm actually not a distinguished professor, I'm a presidential professor, which means probably nothing outside of the academy, but just in case this is being watched.
Okay.
I want to make sure I properly represent. So I grew up in the DC area and graduated when my grandparents are part of the Black American migration. So they basically left the South and headed north and made it as far as DC, which is, while still below the basic Dixon line, is considered north. So all four of my grandparents came from the South and ended up there. My parents were born and raised and lived out their lives in the DC area. And I was born there and stayed there until about 11th grade. And then I moved, I kept going to school in the area, but I moved out of the area. Graduated high school, went to college in York, Pennsylvania. And then from York, went to Europe, bounced around for a while, and then went to DC, back to DC, taught high school for a little bit at a place called Flock for Little Children. That was run by, it was a partnership between Catholic Charities and the DC public school system. And I did that for a little bit and then left there and went to grad school at Michigan. Got my master's and PhDs out of Michigan and then came here to CUNY, where I went assistant professor, associate professor, full professor, presidential. So my whole career has been here at CUNY and I love it.
Okay. Wow. That is, you kind of wrapped up a lot of time, in a short amount of time. I wanted to go back a little bit and I wanted to speak about, or you to speak about your experiences as a Black man, as a student. How was that? What made you passionate about learning? Did you have great teachers and you was always in a great school community? Did you have any challenges as a student at all?
It's interesting. I think we all have these, what I like to call critical moments in education. And just for the purpose of time, I'll make sure I don't bury the lead. And I'll come back and answer the critical moment question in a minute. But we oftentimes talk about the DOE, specifically here in New York, but nationwide, as not working and leaving kids out, leaving kids behind, and that sort of thing. And I just want to offer I don't want to offer a polyamorous approach, but definitely a more panoramic one. There are people for whom it does work and works very well. There are dedicated people of all races and genders and cultural expressions in New York City who work really hard every single day to educate whoever's sitting in front of them. And that's both in the form of teachers and support staff and administrators and everything else. And good, bad, or indifferent. Every single year, tens of thousands of kids, many of them of color, walk across the stage and get high school diplomas out of the New York City public school system. That does not happen organically. That's a result of sacrifice. And I think that unless we acknowledge that, it almost is disrespectful to those who were able to achieve that. So I just wanted to make sure we give that some airtime and some space. That having been said, there, of course, it works for some, but doesn't work for everyone. And so I think it merits a conversation about who it's not working for and how we can have it work better for them. But so we'll shift to that in a minute, but I want to go back to me and the critical moments and education. I remember what I would call my first educational critical moment. I was in third grade. My mother, who is just a fighter by nature, she believes in swing first and screw the questions. Don't even ask questions later.
I see that you've taken that approach as well, a little bit.
Well, you know, it's a helpful approach at times.
Okay.
I remember being called down to the office, and as I approached the office, I could hear my mother screaming in the office at the time, who was the principal. And what she kept saying over and over again was, "My son is not retarded. My son is not retarded. And F you, my son is not retarded." Okay, so apparently what happened was, so at the school I went to, they had this program, they had tracks, they had tracking. And the lowest, quote unquote, track was what they called SLRD, specific learning and or reading disability. And they were telling my mother they were going to move me into SLRD because I wasn't capable of being successful in general population. What my mother heard was them saying that her son is retarded and they're going to put him with retarded kids. And she was not going to have that. And was, as my mother was. And so as fate would have it, talking about a critical moment education, as fate would have it, that day in the building, the district counselor, or whatever her title was, I'm not sure what it was, for multiple schools, happened to be in the building. In order to calm my mother down, the principal agreed that this woman, Peggy Johnson, would test me. And what I remember was simply just having a conversation with Peggy Johnson. There was no look at this picture and Rorschach test and, you know, read this flashcard, none of that. We just talked. We just had a conversation for about a half an hour, my memory is. And then there was a meeting that took place briefly with my mom, the principal, and Miss Johnson. And Miss Johnson, what I overheard her say was that my mother was correct, that both were correct. My mother and the principal were correct, that I did not belong in SLRD, but I also did not belong in general population education. Miss Johnson said, "The boy is brilliant and highly intelligent. His issue is," I remember she described it in a way that it wasn't a problem. It was just a thing. And she said I was what was called a kinesthetic learner. I physically could not sit still and learn.
Okay.
And so they were moving me out of the general population into what was called TAG, talented and gifted. And I loved TAG because in TAG, you got to sit in the classroom wherever you wanted. There were no assigned seats. If you didn't want to sit at a desk, don't sit at a desk, sit on the floor. For me, I like sitting in the window. There was a huge window ledge at those old schools they had in DC and the DC area. And I would sit in the window. That was my desk, was that window ledge. I could look out the window and see what was going on while the teacher was talking. And when she would call my name, I would answer a question. And if you wanted to get up and go play cards with a friend, you could do that. And the teacher just taught. The teacher just taught. And that was a critical moment because I could have gone into sort of SLRD or into TAG. And I remember distinctly, move the clock ahead several years, when I went to go teach high school in DC. I started teaching the semester had already started. And I should mention, by the way, I never had an education class in my life, a teacher education class in my life. But there I was, teaching at the school in DC. And the first thing I did, the day before I was supposed to start teaching, I went to the school, found my classroom, hooked up with a custodial worker, and took out all the desks out of my room and brought in these 4 6-foot-long tables and pushed them together. So they made like a rectangle, a big, huge rectangle. And I got chairs and we all sat around the table. All my classes, we sat around the table and learned.
What made you do, was that your experience? Because of your experience?
Well, I think it was the school I taught at Flock was for special needs kids who were basically, you know, about to get kicked out, had already been kicked out of DC public school system, some of them. And this is sort of a last chance school. And what I knew going in is that traditional stuff was not going to work.
Not going to work. Yeah.
I knew that was not going to work.
Yeah.
And so the issue was, what could I do that would work and that would be different? And so I love to play cards. And so I taught my students on the first day. I actually taught them bid whist. It's like spades, but for adults. Anyway.
Stop, man. It's violent speech. It's hate speech. Don't do that. Don't do that with Black folks. Don't do that.
It's hate speech. No. You know, somebody got to be at the kitty table. But anyway, the point is.
All right, guys. This is a part of it. This is a part of the teaching process. Just enjoy it. Enjoy it. Go ahead.
So what I would do every day in class, with the way that each section of class worked, was we did 4 things every day. There was a warm up for each class. There was a warm up. There were 2 content things, and then the 4th thing was free time. The bulk of free time was spent playing cards, and because of how the table was set up, it was perfectly conducive for playing cards in my room. And so for the students, you know, my whenever they would act out or wouldn't behave or whatever, my constant line was, "You're eating at your free time." Because the sooner we get through numbers 1, 2, and 3, 4 is all yours. It's your free time. And they would play cards. The girls would do hair. After a while, my room became kind of a hangout room where if students were doing well in other classes, they got to come to my room for the last 10 minutes of class. And it was sort of we used to call it the rec center. And I didn't care. I didn't mind at all.
Well, let me ask you this question. What always intrigues me about your story is not just the challenges you face, but you continue not just to get your master's, but to go on to your PhD. And you talk a lot about some of those experiences. And I've always been interested in like how you continue to persevere, because there's teachers that I know of that are teaching and they're thinking about going for their PhD, or there's people that are in their bachelor's program and they kind of feel discouraged about their experiences and they don't see the sense of going for a master's degree. What compelled you to keep going forward? Even though I know you saw some things and experienced some things that were kind of negative, but you had a different response where you continue to push forward.
I grew up in the Black church, and unlike some Black gay people, I love the Black church. So pageantry, the drama, all of it. All of it. You haven't seen until you know, but there's a phrase that's used, "To whom much is given, much is required."
I've heard that a couple of times from you. I've heard it a couple of times.
And for me, what I say is, if you can, you must. You can, you must. I am clear that there are people who have worked harder than me and got less than I have. I am clear that there are people who were born, lived, and died and never had the opportunity to go to high school, much less college or grad school. I am clear that there are people who are hired as professors around the country, and for stuff that had nothing whatsoever to do with their intellectual acumen, they were unable to move up the ranks from assistant to associate to full to whatever. I'm clear. Now, I'm clear I worked hard. I'm not saying things were handed to me per se, but people worked to create opportunities for me, including my parents. The phrase I used to say to my parents all the time, both in word and writing, was, "Thank you for doing what you had to do so I could do what I want to do." And so that's why, when people would step in the way, and there were, people would step in the way and try to, thwart what I was doing, or deter it, or discourage it, or disparage it in some way, I always felt like those who were against me were not bigger than those who were for me. And, as the old phrase says, the ancestors are watching.
Absolutely. I also wanted to talk about the ways in which you help Black and Brown folks or marginalized groups of students, and the way that you helped me. And a lot of our conversations was around my frustration about something happening in class and me wanting to have a discussion with the professor about their microaggressions and all this kind of stuff. And you always told me, it's get your dissertation done. Let's get that done, and then you move on to something else. Your experiences with the students that you support in the grad center, what are some common struggles that you see them having, and what advice would you give them?
The biggest struggle I see them having, and this is not specific to the graduate center, but the biggest struggle I see them having is what I call sweating the small stuff. My advice is don't sweat the small stuff.
It's kind of easy to say. It's easy to say, but it's difficult when you feel like you need to prove a point or you need to correct someone. How do you
Yeah.
get that space where you don't sweat? How do you get that mindset?
Sure. Well, you've heard me say this before. I'm sure I shared this with you when you were journeying through your PhD.
Mhm.
My memory is you would get very frustrated because something would happen in one of your classes, with a student would say something or a professor would say something, and you felt it could not go unchallenged. And I
Yes.
was like, sure it can. Sure it can. So how does one not get frustrated? There's an old African proverb that says, it's not impossible. I'm paraphrasing. It's not impossible, but it's difficult for a giraffe to explain what it sees to a turtle. A. B, well, let's go back to A for a minute. So even if the giraffe were to pick the turtle up to show the turtle what it sees, the turtle's natural inclination is going to be to run up into its shell. So now the giraffe has to stop what it's doing in order to wait for the turtle to calm down, to come out of its shell. And when it does come out of its shell, the giraffe still has to take a long time to explain because this is the first time the turtle's seeing anything. That's A. B, entities eat on the level they're at. That's why giraffes eat leaves off the trees and turtles eat grass off the ground. Now, it's not impossible for a giraffe to eat grass off the ground.
Mm.
All it has to do is spread its legs, lower its neck, lower its head, and eat the grass off the ground. And it can do that. Here's the problem. If the giraffe does it too long, it'll snap its neck and kill it.
Mm.
And what I tell people is, don't let a turtle experience kill your giraffe agenda.
Wow. I feel like I need to be taking notes again.
And for me,
Go ahead.
that's how it's easy for me not to sweat the small stuff.
Mm.
I'm able to quickly figure out, okay, what level is that? Is that a turtle, a warthog, a buffalo, whatever?
So now we're calling people animals is what we're doing. We're naming.
No, we're not. We're describing experiences.
Okay.
Don't let a turtle experience.
Mm-hmm.
It's important because when you're able to disassociate it from the person, the only thing when it comes to people, I tell folks, I tell my colleagues, I tell my kids, I tell my students, I tell anybody willing to listen, don't listen to people who don't love you.
Mm.
You can critique my work. Obviously I publish a lot and get grants and do what you do as a professor or whatever. So I can write something, you can critique that. But when it comes to critiquing me, I only listen to those who I know love me.
Mm.
And as a result, and that's different from a turtle experience. Because sometimes people who love me because of the level they're at, they're wrapped up in their own turtle experience.
Right. I hear
And
you.
I can't get wrapped up in that because I got a giraffe agenda that I got to deal with.
Wow. As always, very powerful words. I need your advice. So there's a lot happening throughout the Department of Education. You've been seeing, or the news has been reporting that there's been a lot of violent stuff happening in front of schools with students on trains. And I wanted you to kind of share some advice with us as principals, administrators, superintendents, even students, families that are in the room. What are your thoughts about it? What are some things we can do to help our students? And how do we change that narrative and what's happening with our students in terms of the uptick in violence throughout the city?
Sure. Well, I think a couple things. One is to contextualize it. While there's an uptick in violence, it's not nearly as bad as it once was. That's
In
for sure.
comparison to 90s, early 2000s.
Sure, the 80s, the night, God help the 70s. So things are, not as bad as they once were. Unfortunately, I think that violence is a part of the human experience. Back to the Black church model, or in Judeo-Christian model, the creation story argues there was at one point 4 people on the planet, Adam and Eve and Cain and Abel, and one killed the other. He could have gone to Hawaii, he could have gone someplace else, but no, just chose to take a life. I think, I always argue if it ever gets to the point there's two people left on the planet, one's going to want to slap the other. But I think while we can acknowledge that, I think we don't have to condone it. And letting people know that everyone has a right to feel safe. Everyone has a right to feel safe. And we all have a responsibility in our community of having us all feel safe. And quite often, the root of violence is about power and control. Those who feel powerless or disempowered to some degree exert in some form of violence, at least initiating it, in order to gain control and power. And communicating and empowering people and letting them know that you do have a power. You do have a secret power, whatever that is. So that people feel that if I remember several years ago, 2012, I had a nephew who was murdered. He was shot in the head in his car. And clearly he was shot while in the car. It was someone who was in the car with him. And his son, his 1-year-old son, was in the back seat of the car. And so there was a period of time where my family didn't know who killed him. But I remember saying to my family, it's clear to me that my nephew would not have let someone who he thought was going to hurt him in that car.
That close, yeah.
Especially with his son.
Right.
So whoever shot him, he knew him. And if he knew him, we probably did as well. And so we need to prepare ourselves once we discover, and it didn't take long to figure out who did it. Cell phones and that, text messages and that kind of thing. They figured out who did it. And come to find out, the kid lived about 3 blocks down the street.
That's usually the case with most shootings like that.
And so you have, 2 families destroyed. 2 families destroyed. And had that young man been able to understand and appreciate what pulling that trigger was going to do to not only our family, but to his, and not other people. You can disagree, but that doesn't mean the person you're disagreeing with is inherently your enemy.
Right. Yeah. You just walk away.
And seeing people in more dynamic fashions and panoramic fashions. And understanding that, okay, they voted for Trump. I didn't vote for Trump. That doesn't mean they are the totality of evil on the planet. I'm a Christian, they're Jewish. I'm Black, they're white. I'm a man, they're a woman. I'm gay, they're straight. These differences can be celebrated and not, seen as a source of contention. Yeah, and I think people that, and we as adults, sorry to interrupt you, but we as adults have to embody that.
Absolutely.
And when young people see us othering people and diminishing people based on characteristics, it creates a space for them to do the same.
Yeah. Absolutely. I couldn't agree more that having different points of view doesn't mean that we have to hate each other and kill each other. Another issue that we're facing, or that many educators, administrators, superintendents are facing, is low attendance. After COVID happened, a lot of students that were used to online learning haven't been coming back to school. They were used to doing everything online. The students that are coming into the school are depressed, they have anxiety, they're struggling a lot to interact with other classmates. And I just wanted your thoughts on what could we do to improve attendance, or what systems or structures could we think about in schools or throughout the Department of Education to help improve attendance for students?
If I had clear answers for that, I'd be rich. But here's what we do know. Not everybody is absent. Some are indeed coming back. Not everybody is having difficulty adjusting. Some are thrilled to get the hell out of their house and be back with their friends. And some are thrilled by the classroom experience as well, the teaching in person. So again, back to how I started the conversation, that for some things are indeed working. For others, it's not. And I would hazard to guess, as we think about the biggest predictor, there's several predictors, but when you think about the biggest predictor for those who aren't coming back or those who are having difficulty adjusting, it's probably something to do with poverty.
More than likely, there's a correlation.
Yeah, that kids who are in that lowest quintile of socioeconomic status are probably struggling much harder than those who are at the top quintile. And then the others fall somewhere in the middle. And so I think as a society, we have to decide, who do we value, all of us or just the rich of us?
Mm.
And if we value all of us, we know it's hard to educate a hungry child, but it's also hard to educate a homeless child.
Yeah.
It's hard to it's hard to expect a kid to do homework at night if there are no lights on. And so I think the issue is bigger. I remember when I taught in DC, and again, it was an alternative school. My undergraduate degree is in juvenile corrections. So this is a school that was basically for that population. And I remember, I was young, but being entertained by what people thought I could accomplish in 6 hours.
Don't get me in trouble. Don't get me in trouble, man. Just
no, seriously. I was like, given these kids live in group homes, they live in foster care. Some of them were homeless.
It's intense. It's intense.
That was the bulk of the kids in the school. They had been sexually violated and molested, and some of them were sex workers. They were drug dealers. They, had gotten jumped the night before. They, whatever. They sometimes they weren't coming to school not because of school, but because they were running from their probation officer. All of that, and then they come to me and basically say, well, Juan, he was in your class for 45 minutes. I'm like, Negro, please, are you kidding? The fact that child is still on this side of glory, I call it success.
Yeah.
And even for, the phrase I like to use is, if you can just keep them alive until they age out of stupid. Just keep them alive.
That's real talk.
Until they age out of stupid. That's the key. And we know that stupid ends, somewhere in the early 20s.
That's true.
And long before that. Which basically means, sorry?
The frontal lobe doesn't develop too much until.
But unfortunately, so that means that you have to educate them throughout all of students.
Well, this is Professor Juan Battles saying, I'm laughing at them because he's my friend. I don't know if I agree with everything, but no, I do.
Sure you don't.
Last thing, in terms of methodology, I don't know if you've named it, I don't know if you've given it a label, but you have this way of engaging people. I know part of it is your comedy, it's your personality, but what is your method in terms of how you teach? Like I know for myself as a student, I was excited to go to class because it was going to be comical, it was going to be informative. I was just like, man, this dude is crazy. In my mind, I'm like, how does he still have the job? What does anyone know what's happening? Is anyone recording? But I wanted to know, like, what's your method? Is there a method? Is there a structure? Like, what do you do in preparation for a class, or like how you lecture? What's your style, you'd say?
Well, I do like humor. I think that's helpful. Well, I have a couple of things going for me at the Graduate Center, and I'm going to focus on that because that's where I've been working exclusively since 2006. In '94, I came to CUNY, but I was working in Hunter as well back then. Mm-hmm. Here's a couple of things I'm clear on. I'm clear by the fact, and I teach mainly statistics and methods courses, but I also teach course on race and other things.
Amazing course, guys. I know some of you are struggling right now and you feel like, why is God doing this to you? It's an amazing course. You're probably not going to get a good grade, just to be honest. The best student is not, and he lets you know. But if you learn some of the struggle, it really changes the way you see the world. I'm sorry, I know you're going through it. You feel like, why are they mandating this and humanity is different? It's needed. It will change your life. Trust me. Okay.
And you learned a lot in the course.
Oh gosh, I love it. I love everything. It changes the way you think. You understand. That course helped me to regulate my emotions because what I mean is you start thinking this is just happening to me, like the experiences in a predominantly white institute or, microaggression, everything that you think is just about you. When you go to SPSS and you start doing some regressions, you're like, oh my God, this happens. This is a part of the world we live in. And it's just really, really good. So I'm not doing it to big him up. He's great. He doesn't need that. But that course changed my life. It absolutely did. So.
Oh, bless you. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
So at the Graduate Center, I have a couple of things going for me, and I'm clear about that. One is, as far as the teaching and the success as far as the teaching goes, I have a significant number of students, whether it's statistics or my course on Black America, where I am the first Black man they see in front of them.
Yes, that is true.
They've never had a Black male professor.
Nope.
So for many of them, they're already in my corner. I mean, they're just excited. Oh my God, there's this, even the quant methods course for the stat course, for example, and the program you got your PhD from in urban ed. Most quant courses have about 10 students, 10 or 12 students in them. The first day of class, mine had 20 something, I think. The same thing is true when I teach my Black America course. Most race courses have a fewer number of students, and I usually hover in the lower 20s. And I think a part of that is not just the content of the material being taught, but it's also the body I'm wrapped in. I'm this Black gay man who has a teaching style that's uniquely different than most other people. And I think that works in my advantage. The other thing at this point is I've been doing it for so long. Either you get good at it or you just wrap it up, one or the other. And I unlike, and I say this respectfully to my colleagues, I'm a good teacher because I had the benefit of teaching before I went to grad school. I also taught while I was in grad school, but before I went to grad school, teaching high school, I'm a good teacher. My colleagues in the Graduate Center, college period, doesn't necessarily reward faculty to be good teachers. They reward us to be good professors. Mm. And those are two different job descriptions. You see, a professor, you are to acquire knowledge, produce knowledge through publications, what have you, produce knowledge, and then profess that information to your students. You sit in a room and just talk and profess that information to your students. That's what a professor does.
Not necessarily good teaching.
Professor has an additional responsibility. Sorry?
Yeah, that's not necessarily good teaching. That's just
no, it's not teaching. It's professing. On the other hand, a teacher has an additional responsibility. A teacher has to get the knowledge, get the information, share the information, but simultaneously assume some responsibility to make sure that the student got the information. And so if you think, I'll just use your class as an example. So, which is why my methods course, for example, the students always have warm-ups or those quizzes. I know, it's gonna be all right. It's gonna be a flashback. I know, it's a flashback.
It gave me anxiety, dude. I was like,
I know.
Why is he doing this? I felt like he was angry at us for some reason. Like, I didn't do anything. Oh my gosh. People tried to cheat. I'm like, I know we're not cheating in the graduate course, guys. Let's just listen to what he's saying. Just so you know, there was a whole, I know I'm going on a tangent. There was a whole different group chat about it. And we were like, hey, what's up with this dude, man? Like, why is he upset? I'm like, guys, I think this is it's just one of those courses that it's very factual. If you're not paying attention, you're not going to do well. And, it's not personal.
Well, the other thing too is I'm clear, because for those who are watching, the quizzes happen at the beginning of class. It's always based on something I already covered in the previous week. I'm clear people are late to class because there's no reason to be on time.
That's true.
I'm clear about that. And I learned that in high school when I taught high school. And so when I taught high school, they had a warm-up as well, which was the quiz. And having people seated and ready to go when I am, and having them begin to think in certain ways even before they get in that room, the quiz was very successful in doing that. And it also let me know who was with me and who was not with me.
Mm.
And you didn't see as a student, because why would you? Because you did fine. There were a number of students where I could reach out to them individually and did.
Mm-hmm.
And one-on-one time with. And I could tell based on their quiz, because the homework, you know, you can do the homework in a group. I don't know what you contributed versus what you borrowed or stole from one of your colleagues. The quiz is
authentic assessments. You need authentic assessments from the student.
Exactly.
Exactly.
Yeah. And the quiz was very successful in doing that. And I could tell who was with me, who was not with me. And I could go back and get those, you know, who weren't. Yeah. And leave no student behind.
Well, listen, man, here comes the uncomfortable part that I didn't write in my notes. This is the uncomfortable part that Professor Juan Battle does not like. He hates, makes him very uncomfortable. I wanted to give you your flowers. I know. Take it easy. Don't crack a joke. Now he's gonna start fidgeting. That's his little ADD.
But what I am doing is I'm playing with my slinky.
Okay, so. Whatever. That's your nervous energy coming out. I just want to say thank you, dude. You are changing lives. You are changing mindsets. You're influencing so many different people. And I don't think that you hear it enough. And even when you hear it, you don't allow people to say it. And you try and crack a joke because it makes you feel uncomfortable. The work you do matters so very much. And I'm happy to introduce you to my side of the world, the K through 12 side, because I do believe that you have so much to offer, not just at the Graduate Center, but also in the K through 12 world. So thank you again for changing my life, changing my family's life. And we look forward to hearing the great things that you're going to do. So thank you.
I appreciate both that and you.
Thank you.
Being your advisor was, actually, Sean, you'll appreciate this. And just in case you think I'm kidding, if you go to juanbattle.com/courses, which is a phrase you've heard many times.
Yeah.
One of the templates I now use on that with my students who are behind you is your dissertation and your proposal.
Wow.
You can go to that website now. And so I am, since we last chatted, I'm actually now the chair of nursing because I don't have enough on my life to deal with.
You're doing too much, man.
I know, right? Anyway, so I'm chairing a bunch of nursing dissertations. And so I just had a student whose proposal was so good, I added it to the list. And she said, she was, oh my God, I'm now Sean Brown. They all use yours as a template. So.
I'm grateful, man. I'm grateful. You know, I call you my crazy uncle. I wrote that actually in my dissertation. He said you should. I said, this is my guy. And I'm really grateful for you, dude, for real. And I mean it. And you know I mean it. I'm a little bit too honest. So when you get in crack, because I see you getting, we're going to get off.
All right.
Thank you again and have a great day.
Thank you for your time and sorry I was late. And we'll talk again soon.
Cool.